We're going to move into mode 9 now. In-use monitor performance tracking. It's in all your scan tools. If you have a global scan tool of any value, decent, you don't even have to have an expensive one. Most of those have them too. You go into mode 9. If we'll show you later if you have Autel. Of course, Autel doesn't use modes. I'll show you how to get to there with the Autel. They do a nice job on it. But basically, it was designed by the California Air Resources Board to make sure that the OEMs were running their monitor test with enough frequency to catch emission failures. Some of you are around in the older days where pre this mode, man, the cars didn't run. Volvos, Porsches, there were some of those that didn't run their test. Some Toyotas with catalytic converters had a difficult time, Tacomas, things like that. And you were out in the cold if you needed a smog check. They were out of warranty. There's no follow-up on it, especially on the Volvos and stuff. This is to hold the manufacturer accountable for a much, much longer period of time to get for them to have to back up their vehicles if they're not running their monitors frequently enough. So the idea was now the vehicles are out of warranty would get no service. Now the vehicles that are in warranty much longer, they will have to generate a fix for them. Now, how can you as a technician use it to your advantage? In the second bullet right here, it says this information, when understood, can indicate the vehicle experiences, the type of vehicle it is, like a start-stop hybrid, and if a flash has been performed. I'll show you the frequencies. They're very low for what CARB is requiring. So they're telling the manufacturer, hey, we want your catalytic converter to run 3 out of 10 times, and we're happy. If you have a car that comes in where the catalytic converter is only running 3 out of 10 times, you got to quote the job, you're going to lose money if you don't understand what you're doing, because 3 out of 10 times is not very good odds. You might be able to make $10 million a year in baseball hitting 300, but in fixing cars, if you're hitting 300, you ain't making that kind of money. You're not even coming close to it. You're losing time and money. So we're going to show you how to apply this. So if you go into mode 9, and I hope that some of you tomorrow on the job that haven't dealt with this before, maybe you have a slow time, you're going to pull your global scan tool up and take a look at this and start applying this. When you hear the word completion, automatically put your brain to the OEM enable criteria that you've been taught for years. This is directly related to the OEM enable criteria. What it says is when that number increments, in this case it says 1,675 times, the OEM enable criteria has run long enough to determine if the system could fail. If it does, it increments. Okay, that's what you want to think. When you hear the word completion, think of OEM. They call it a numerator because guess what? Numerators we use in fractions, and we're going to use fractions to create a ratio to see how frequently we're running these tests. When you understand this, it's quick, it's easy, and it can point you in the right direction. So that's completion. We're going to go over this multiple times. So that means that we're meeting whatever the enable criteria is for a particular DTC. We've looked at this for years. When this criteria is met on this particular car, this Toyota, if we meet the criteria and it's run long enough to determine that it could fail, even though it passed, but it ran long enough to determine the system could fail if it was going to, it would increment that top number. Cool, that's great. But guess what? Without a bottom number, we don't know what our success rate is. So CARB slipped in this other thing called conditions to give us a ratio, which we're going to show you here shortly. Okay, conditions. Do not think of OEM. Do not even associate it with the OEM. Conditions is a driving pattern established by the Air Resources Board that says if you drive the car under these conditions, we expect your catalytic converter to be running at least a 30% ratio of the time. That's all it's for. And I will show this to you, and when we get done tonight, you will understand that bottom number like nobody you ever thought you could. And nobody's been explaining this out there because it hasn't been understood. So this car right now says we've got 1,675 completions, and CARB says there's 1,450 times we charge you with a trip. We're going to turn that into a ratio, and we're going to turn it into a money maker for you, because basically, right off the surface here, the top number is much larger than the bottom number, that tells me that it's easy to run this catalytic converter. So if I want to quote this job, I should be able to make money on it. That's the way it's going to be. That's what we're going to use it for. So keep the conditions. OEM, we're good. That's the OEM enable criteria. Conditions is what we got to explain. So the bottom number for it to increment, to go up one for the CAT, the O2, the EGR in most cases, there's an exception, VVT. Here's what has to happen. You have to have a total run time of 10 minutes, propulsion time. You have to spend 5 minutes over 25 miles an hour. You have to hit 5 minutes at 25 miles an hour. I'm going to show this to you. You have to have one continuous idle for 30 seconds. If you do those, then that bottom number goes up. You have to be below 8,000 feet, and that's typical with any monitor test. If you get above 8,000 feet, they're suspended because the altitude is too unstable. They're not going to run their monitor test. Don't even try it. If you're at a high altitude area, you could be going in high altitude, up and down. They may or may not work. They may. Ambient temperature. California here, we don't usually have to worry about this. But certain areas where around the country where some of you may live, below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, we're not running the test. And for hybrids, that only get charged with a trip if the runtime is more than 10 seconds. So what does all this mean? Now, just to show you what CARB says is the minimum requirement, you see how low their requirements are to hold the manufacturers accountable? But I got news for you, everybody. If they come in the door and you want to quote the job and these numbers are showing up, you got a problem. You're going to have trouble quoting this job because if that is the number for that particular readiness group, you're going to have a little bit of trouble. The converter's only going 30% of the time. The CAT's only going 30% of the time. The O2 sensors, the VVT, you're going to probably lose some money on this job if you don't understand what's going on. But this is what CARB says. If we check out the fleet, and we're going to show you a case study tomorrow night that we were partly responsible for in Maserati, based on these numbers, that eventually got a recall. That's what the purpose of this is. Okay, now let's put this together. So now we're going to put you to, this is the tech at work. This is money in your pocket. You're calculating out your chances of success. If I asked Andrew, you got a 116% chance tonight of winning the lotto, 116% chance, would you bet everything you got on the lotto?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. For you guys out there, if you have to quote this, running this catalytic converter test, quote it and quote it confidently and say, I can get this done. 116% chance is well above 100. I'm going to knock this thing out with no problem. Okay, that's how you use this. Now we look here. I'm going to show you this case study and what other questions you might want to ask. But take a look at this one. This is off a Autel on a particular vehicle, and it's got 118 completions, but it's got 437 CARB trips. The ratio is only 2.70. CARB says a minimum of 3.36, but they would test a lot of vehicles to make sure this is an anomaly for this vehicle. But there's a lot of other things to consider in this, which we're not going to talk about right now. But this is an eye catcher right here telling me, whoa, time out. Before I quote this job, I better do a little homework. Okay, I better do a little homework there. Okay, now here's your EGR VVT. Andrew, you betting all the money on this one too?
Oh, absolutely.
This is how you do it, everybody. You see these kind of ratios? It's telling you they're easy to do. Okay. Now, I threw this one in. This is a, look at that 1 to 2 ratio. Well, that's really nice. That's 50%. But guess what? It's only gone 2 times. And if you take a look here, I'll show you this a little better right here. You take a look. This is 3,260 CARB trips, 3,260 CARB trips, 1,545 even for VVAP. EGR's only got 2. Yeah, it's 50%. But why so little? Okay, so we're going to get into that later. EVAP, this is extremely high. If I see this on an EVAP, I know it's got a key off system. I can, if I got to verify my repair, it's even telling me, wow, this EVAP key off system looks like it's pretty easy to get the job done. If I got to verify my repair and I want to do it through the PCM, I got an 80% chance of success, 83%, almost 84%. So this is how we're going to use these numbers in these case studies tomorrow night. Okay, now this is an EVAP one that is not uncommon. for to see on a 40 thousandths of an inch leak or a key off system, because people say evap doesn't run. I say evap does run, but it gets interrupted. It's a very specific, what we call series monitor. Things have to happen in order. If you change your driving pattern or shut the car off in that time period, it's got to start all over again. And also notice the bottom number. Remember earlier there were specific conditions that says you have to meet temperature startup at startup. If not, we're not going to charge you with a trip. So this tells me this car gets a lot of warm startups. So that's why this number is very low. This one is probably low because I always say evap gets interrupted, or maybe these people like to run their fuel low. Maybe they like to run it full all the time. Maybe they're doing short trips. Who knows? But something is interrupting this. But this number is low because it doesn't meet the temperature requirements most of the time at startup. So that's how we use that. If you see something like this for secondary O2, I want you to pay close attention to secondary O2s because we're going to see a couple case studies tomorrow night related to secondary O2s. Please don't forget that those things are there. Okay? Ratio meets CARB requirements, but the question is, if this ratio pretends to your success, Andrew, you betting the house on 35%? See how much of a gambler he is.
Oh no.
You're gonna do a little research here, aren't you?
I'm gonna spend some time. Yes, sir.
You got it. Okay, and that's what I want you guys to do when you see this. Okay, now you will never see the O2 heater in mode 9. The reason why, it's not really an emission standard. It's a simple thing that does the heater work or doesn't work. They don't really calculate emissions off of it. They just calculate the fact that it works or it doesn't work. So you will not see the O2 heater in the mode 9 list yet